This is a true story of something I experienced. It must have been over a decade by now. I was a kid at the time that my dad had bought this quaint house on the outskirts of a little town. It was a decently sized home with a big backyard overlooking the marshes and unused farmers' fields, and the only entrance to it was either through the house or across the large fields. To put into context how this fits into the story was because my bedroom at the time of living with my dad was situated at the back of the house, facing the big backyard. I remember one night, very vividly, some 10-12 years later. I was sitting in my room, doing digital artwork on my computer. It was something I loved to do as a teenager, and usually I'd listen to music with headphones on. The way I was sitting had me facing away from the big window in my room, the largest in the house. I had my blackout blinds drawn, and it was the only room in the entire house that had the light on, and I'd assume from outside you'd see slivers of light through the edges of the folding blinds. I think it was between 2:30 and 3 in the morning. I was peacefully minding my own business when I hear a massive slam on my window. It was a dull but loud thud, and what I thought was a shout. My dad was sleeping peacefully in the room next to me. How he didn't hear anything at the time still amazes me to this day. I remember just sitting there, shook, no clue what I just heard, until it happened again. I heard it clear. Somebody was outside my window, in the backyard. Whoever this was had no reason to be there. I remember being too scared to open my blinds. Instead, I got up, just staring at the window, not taking my eyes off it. Something I'm thankful for to this day was I went with my gut feeling. My gut was telling me to grab a flashlight and check the front door. This was an old house, so I would have to leave the comfort of the house to enter the barn to get to the main entrance of the house. I remember shining my light through the glass in the door. The window had the frosted film for privacy. But sure enough, I barely got the flashlight lifted 3-4 inches to the glass before seeing the coat of whoever was out there. The real kicker. Absolute terror set in when I realized the door hadn't been locked this entire time. I managed to lock it and run inside, and the first thing I grabbed was a bread knife. Not practical, but when your adrenaline and fear is coursing through your brain, it's the last thing you think of. I remember trying to wake up my dad, who was passed out like a drunk sailor, to see whoever was outside. We never found the man, and he never came back. Had I not locked that door, prank or not, I dread to think what would have happened to me. I've seen some shit in my life, but people will forever scare me. I was a single mother in my mid-40s and had just moved to a new house with my then 4-year-old son back in 2002 when we were both living in our hometown of Altoona, Pennsylvania. We had only been there for a few weeks when one late night there was a knock on our front door. My son was asleep on the couch, and I was still up unpacking and putting things away. I pulled the curtain aside and looked out to see a petite young woman standing and shivering on our porch. Our front door had a chain latch attached to it, so I kept it on as I opened the door, only as far as the latch would allow. Then I asked her what she wanted. She said she had locked herself out of the house and asked if she could come in and use the phone. I asked her where she lived, and she described an address of a house about a block and around the corner. She would have had to have passed at least a dozen of houses, which I noticed had their porch lights on, and there was also a still operational payphone across the street. Alarm bells in my head were going off about this. With my young son asleep in our living room, I was reluctant to let her in, but it was a chilly winter night, so I offered a coat and my cell phone, which I handed off to her through the doorway. She took my coat and my phone, then called someone but walked to the other end of the porch where I couldn't hear her. So I closed the door after I told her to put the phone in the mailbox when she was done and to bring my coat back tomorrow. She left the phone but never returned my coat. For several weeks I got strange phone calls at all hours. People on the end of those calls were demanding to know where I was when I answered, or simply hung up. Approximately 2 to 3 months later, I was reading the front page of Altoona's local newspaper. Then I found a photo of the young woman who had knocked at our door that night. She and 10 other suspects had been arrested in a major drug bust. I immediately got chills thinking back on that cold winter night. How she showed up in a sleeveless shirt after passing several homes in the neighborhood. I wonder what might have happened to me and my young son if I had ignored my unease and my suspicions in spite of her seemingly helpless appearance. Long ago was a terrifying night. I had the most chilling experience of my life. I was 15 years old, living in a small, quiet town where everyone knew each other. It was a peaceful place, or so I thought until that unforgettable night. My parents were away for the weekend, leaving me in the care of my older sister, Emma. She was 16 and loved the idea of being in charge. That night, we decided to watch a movie. Halfway through, there was a knock at the door. Emma paused the movie. We thought it was just one of the neighbors, but when she looked, there was no one there. We went back to watching our movie. We weren't nervous because we thought it was just some of the other kids playing pranks. Later that night, I woke up to a weird tapping sound on my window. I was a bit scared because of the dark, but I mustered the courage to peek through the blinds. There, in the dim moonlight, I saw someone or something in all black standing in our backyard, just staring at the house. My heart raced. I ran to Emma's room and woke her up. When we both looked again, the figure was gone. The next day, we told our parents about the incident, but they said it was probably just a lost traveler or a neighbor's guest. But I couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. The following night, the tapping returned, more persistent this time. It sounded like someone was intentionally trying to scare us. I told Emma and she called our parents, but there was no answer. We were alone and scared. Emma decided to call the police, but as soon as she picked up the phone, the tapping stopped. We felt relieved, but still uneasy. We tried to sleep, but a sudden loud bang from downstairs jolted us awake. Emma grabbed a flashlight, and we tiptoed downstairs. The living room was a mess. Books from the shelves were thrown onto the floor, and the couch cushions were scattered. Then we heard a whisper, a faint, eerie voice coming from the kitchen. It was singing a slow, haunting tune. Emma signaled for us to sneak back upstairs, but as we turned, the kitchen light flicked on by itself. We bolted upstairs, locked ourselves in my room, and pushed my dresser against the door. We huddled together, listening as footsteps started coming up the stairs, slow and heavy. They stopped right outside my room. The doorknob rattled gently, then more violently. We were trembling, holding each other tightly. The house went silent for a moment, then a voice, soft and raspy, spoke from the other side of the door. "I know you're in there, kids." We didn't respond. Then, the sound of footsteps receded. We stayed awake the whole night. We were so scared to breathe. In the morning, our parents came back and found us asleep in my room, the dresser still blocking the door. We explained everything, and they called the police. The officers found no signs of forced entry, but they did find footprints outside, beneath my window, and around the house. After that incident, my parents installed security cameras and an alarm system. The police patrols in our area increased. But the scariest part was that they never caught the person who stalked and terrified us that night. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I hear a faint tapping, and I freeze, wondering if it's just my imagination or if my stalker has returned.